Hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everyone today to this markup, and I'm going to keep my remarks brief because the bill we're marking up today is very important but not particularly controversial, and we've reported it out before. Pursuant to notice, the Committee on Science meets to consider the following measure, H.R. 5450, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Act. I ask unanimous consent for the authority to recess the committee at any point during consideration on these matters, and without objection, that is so ordered. Virtually every group that has looked at ocean issues has concluded that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration would be able to function better if it had a clear basis in law. And that's what this bill, a NOAA Organic Act, would provide. It would give this key science agency, which was created by executive order, a firm legal basis for its full range of activities and responsibilities. That's hard to argue with. The bill, which was introduced by Dr. Ehlers, who has been its tireless champion, would also strengthen science at NOAA, which makes sense since NOAA is a major science agency. We reported this bill out earlier as H.R. 50, and the only difference between the reported version of that bill and today's is language we negotiated with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. That language makes clear that we are not intending to give NOAA any new authority in areas of concern to that committee, such as new authority to build buildings or to issue new kinds of regulations. So with that jurisdictional hurdle behind us, this bill should move forward. We will continue to work with the Resources Committee, which shares jurisdiction over NOAA, to bring the bill to the floor. The Resources Committee has also been on hold pending the resolution of the Transportation Committee issue. I assume that most of our debate today will not be on the bill, but on the Miller Amendment, and I'll hold my comments on that until we get to it. I want to thank the members on both sides of the aisle who have contributed to this bill, and I look forward to its passage. Chair recognizes Mr. Gordon of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was about a year ago that we marked up and reported this bill under the number H.R. 50. Since that time, a variety of situations relating to NOAA have come to our attention. Thus, some of our members have amendments to further improve this bill. I believe it's important to get this legislation right. The Organic Act for the agency must include the tools the agency needs to today and to the future to allow this agency to grow and change as needed to serve our resource needs as our nation grows and changes. NOAA is currently experiencing serious problems with the procurement of its new polar satellite services series. The long-term implications of the cost overrun and schedule delay in this program are likely to impact all other NOAA programs for years to come. Representative Udall has an amendment to offer that will address this problem for future procurements, as well as continue to work together to find a solution for the current NEPO's problem. As in the case of H.R. 50, this bill does not include important authorities and functions in fisheries, coastal zone management, ocean mapping and charting, and a number of other important operations that are in the jurisdiction of the Committee on Resources. Until our colleagues complete their work, we will not have a true Organic Act for NOAA. I understand you will not be supporting all of our amendments today. I regret that, especially in the case of the amendment to be offered by Mr. Miller, which would ensure that open scientific dialogue and debate is standard operating procedure at NOAA. I look forward to a constructive debate on this amendment as we proceed this morning. We thank you for this second opportunity to further improve this legislation. We look forward to working with you and your colleagues on the committee, on our colleagues on the Committee on Resources as this bill continues through the legislative process. I yield back my time.
Without objection, members may place statements in the record at this point. We will now consider H.R. 5450, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Act. I recognize Dr. Ehlers to describe the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to explain my bill. H.R. 5450, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Act, is an organic act for NOAA. It is long overdue. NOAA has operated for years without it, and it is clearly needed. An organic act defines the overall mission and functions of an agency. As an example, my bill states that the mission of NOAA is to understand and predict changes in the Earth's oceans and atmosphere. Secondly, to conserve and manage coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes ecosystems. And third, educate the public about these topics. Since 1970, when NOAA was created by executive order, the agency has operated under a confusing collection of issue-specific laws that are not coordinated by an overarching mission. In September 2004, the final report of the U.S. Commission on Oceans called for Congress to pass an organic act for NOAA and clarify in one place the mission and program goals of the agency. The administration supports congressional passage of a NOAA Organic Act and made it a priority in the administration's formal response to the Ocean Commission report. In the 108th Congress, witnesses at Science Committee hearings strongly endorsed my NOAA Organic Act. In a new report released just yesterday, the Joint Oceans Commission Initiative reiterated the need for NOAA to be codified in law, and this bill embodies specific priorities outlined in their report. And yet, the Organic Act has languished for the past year over a jurisdictional claim by another committee. This new version of my bill makes a simple addition to the language in Section 12 to address these jurisdictional claims so that we can pass this bill and let the Resources Committee do their part. The Resources Committee will add language about fisheries management and other NOAA issues that are under their jurisdiction. I look forward to working with the members of the committee to join us in passing truly comprehensive legislation for NOAA into law. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 5450, and I also would like to just offer a brief comment regarding the amendments, particularly the amendment by Mr. Miller, which the previous speaker mentioned. I am in sympathy with that amendment. I do not believe, in fact, I strongly believe that this is not the appropriate place to offer an amendment. An organic act is good for the ages. We don't need to address a short-term, immediate question, which has already been largely taken care of and accomplished, by adding an amendment to an organic act. If we did do so for years from now on, people would say, why did they add that stupid little amendment to this wonderful Organic Act? And so what we're proposing here is to pass it without the Miller Amendment, and we will address the concerns of the Miller Amendment in a separate way. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Dr. Alias, I want to thank you for your leadership on this, and I want to thank Mr. Wu, who is not yet here, for working so effectively and cooperatively with you. You're a good team, and you've produced a good product. Since Mr. Wu is not here, I'd like to recognize Mr. Gordon for any comments he might make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me also congratulate Mr. Ehlers for his work in bringing forth this important legislation. But I would say to him, since he raises the question of the Miller Amendment, if scientific integrity is not a part of the Organic Act, the basis for this agency, where in the world is it legitimate? I mean, this is the place to develop the scientific integrity of the agency. Yield back my time.
Thank you. I think we are forewarned that the Miller Amendment is going to be the subject of some serious discussion. And my thought is we had originally scheduled, Mr. Miller, your amendment to be first. I'd rather defer on that and go with some of the other less contentious, if you will, amendments, because that will give the opportunity for our colleagues to get here to join us to hear the eloquent words that are going to come from both sides of the podium. With that in mind, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the members proceed with the amendments in the revised order of the roster. Without objection, so ordered. What's the first one? The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Costello. Mr. Costello, are you ready?
Mr. Chairman, I am, and Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5450 offered by Mr. Costello of Illinois.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading without objection. So ordered. I recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, when we last considered this bill, I offered an amendment to ensure that taxpayers' funds are used to sustain and promote jobs here in the United States whenever possible. Unfortunately, my amendment was weakened by the adoption of a secondary amendment offered by the chairman. Mr. Chairman, you expressed your concern at the time that my amendment would have an impact on WTO agreements that we have with the World Trade Organization. I made the point at the time that we should be more concerned about protecting jobs here in the United States and let the courts decide on what may or may not violate our trade agreements. Unfortunately, at the time, this committee did not have the benefit of knowing the number or the magnitude of NOAA's contracts that are being performed overseas. The amendment I am offering today is designed to obtain this information on an ongoing basis. My amendment establishes an annual reporting requirement. The identical language was included in the NASA authorization bill that was signed into law at the end of last year. NOAA would be required to provide a report listing the contracts and subcontracts performed overseas. The report must also include an accounting of the purchases made by NOAA from foreign entities. The report will indicate which goods and services were only available for purchase through foreign sources, and it will include information about waivers issued by the administration of the Buy American Act. We have heard repeatedly that we do not have accurate information about offshoring of jobs. This report will provide us some information about the extent to which NOAA contracts and subcontracts are subject to the trend of moving more jobs overseas. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge all members to support this straightforward amendment.
Thank you very much for that description. This is a classic example of how we should work together with consultation, with give and take, back and forth. We've dealt with a subject that is uppermost on all of our minds. It deals with my favorite four-letter word, and don't get nervous, you can use it in public, jobs. And my interest is in American jobs. So we have no objection to the amendment. We appreciate the spirit of cooperation that has been so evident, and the Chair is prepared to accept the amendment. Is there any further discussion? Without? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. No. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted.
We'll do Udall now.
We'll do Mr. Udall. Are you prepared? Next amendment on the roster is an amendment by Mr. Udall. If you're
Mr. Chairman,
prepared,
I have an amendment at the desk.
the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5450 offered by Mr. Udall of Colorado.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, that is so ordered. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the last few weeks, the committee has held 2 hearings on the NPOS program, and concerns were raised on both sides of the aisle that NPOS was not properly managed and that warning signs were apparent, though not taken seriously by those responsible for the oversight of the program. As a result, we have a $6.8 billion program that, unaltered, was estimated to be $7 billion over budget, and with current program changes is expected to total $11.5 billion, $4.7 billion over the original projections. It's with this in mind that I offer my amendment to include greater oversight of large programs at NOAA. There have been many developments in the status of NPOS since we last marked up the NOAA Organic Act. And as NOAA begins to make plans for the next series of the GOES satellite, I believe it's important that proper oversight is in place. My amendment would implement a Nunn-McCurdy-like oversight process for programs that have budgets of $250 million or more. In fact, the language in this amendment is almost identical to that included in the NASA Authorization Act, which was signed into law late last year. Specifically, it would require detailed information provided to Congress up front about the cost and schedule of any major program at NOAA, and establishes a process to follow for yearly oversight over these programs. It requires NOAA to notify Congress if a major program is 15% over budget or delayed 6 months, at which point the agency must develop cost projections for several different scenarios. If the program's cost exceeds 30% of its budget, all spending on the program must end within 18 months. And at this point, the only way the program can proceed is if Congress were to authorize it again. I hate to continue to harp on NPOs, but I think it is an important example of how budget can hamstring, when it has problems, an agency's goals. NOAA's annual budget is usually in the realm of $4 billion. While NOAA will not be the only agency having to cover these cost overruns, it will need to provide significantly more funding than expected as the program moves forward. And this begs the question now that NOAA will continue to do all of its other vital work in atmospheric and oceanic research while trying to cover the costs of NPOs. Looking at this situation more broadly, I think it's important to discuss how over-budget programs can affect NOAA's mission. With the fiscal climate over the past few years, NOAA's world-renowned laboratories have had to endure instability in their budgets. I don't need to tell the members of the committee the importance of the models and research produced by those labs. They're integral to understanding our climate as well as predicting our daily weather. In the last appropriation cycle, we saw NOAA programs such as the Space Environment Center have their budgets cut by nearly half for a reason that is unknown to most in Congress and the American public. With an estimated 1/3 of our economy dependent on weather, we cannot ignore the impact this research has on our economy. Yet one program's cost overruns can indirectly affect the research and world-renowned programs at NOAA by forcing the agency to shift money in order to continue the over-budget program. Further reducing those budgets will jeopardize the quality of NOAA's research. By not properly monitoring major programs, there are many unintended consequences that will have lasting effects on NOAA's ability to perform its mission. Mr. Chairman, I see this as a good government amendment that ensures major programs at NOAA do not potentially derail other efforts at the agency and that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. I would ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment. I thank you and yield back any time I have remaining.
Thank you very much for this good, beneficial amendment, which the Chair is prepared to accept. And I would say to Mr. Udall, don't apologize for what you referred to as harping on NPOs. I prefer to call it constructive and vigorous engagement, and we're going to continue to either harp or constructively and vigorously be engaged. But it's something that is critically important. Oversight of procurement is something that we don't take lightly and will continue to be constructively engaged. This is a good amendment. We'll have to tweak it maybe a little bit in the language, but we'll work with you on that to make sure it complies with the NASA language and our original intent. But the Chair thanks the gentleman for his valued addition to this bill, and the Chair is prepared to accept it. Is there anyone else who cares to be heard on the amendment? If not, the vote is on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. No. The ayes appear to have it, and the amendment is adopted. Now we go to the main act. Chair is prepared to recognize Mr. Miller. Are you prepared?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will report.
Amendment to H.R. 5450, offered by Mr. Miller of North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, it is so ordered, and the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of this stupid little amendment is to safeguard the integrity of science at NOAA, something that should be true across all agencies of government. But this would apply the provisions of freestanding legislation that Mr. Waxman and Mr. Gordon have introduced, that many of us have co-sponsored, that would provide protections and legal requirements that scientific research not be tampered with, it not be censored, and that nobody in NOAA, at least, would disseminate any scientific findings that they knew to be false or misleading. Most important, Mr. Chairman, it is more than an exhortation to the executive branch of government not to do it. It provides real protection for the employees who are in the position to blow the whistle when it does happen. It provides real protections to them. It prohibits any personnel action directed at an employee who blows the whistle, so that they may not lose their job or be demoted or have any other adverse personnel action taken with respect to them. Mr. Chairman, you have spoken eloquently on many occasions on the importance of scientific integrity, that this Congress and all policymakers in government should be able to rely upon the findings of neutral, honest scientific inquiry, that we should not decide what our policy is first or what politics dictates first, and then make it clear to those who do scientific research on federal funding, what conclusions they are to come to support those findings. Whatever conclusion we may reach on what the policy should be, we should have good, honest, scientific research to rely upon. Mr. Chairman, I applaud your letter to Admiral Lautenberger earlier this year. In that letter, you referred to articles in the Washington Post in which NOAA scientists complained of being told to shut up about global warming, not to talk about global climate change. It was very similar to earlier reports coming out of NASA. Mr. Chairman, you said in your letter to Admiral Lautenberger that this was not an isolated incident, that in fact the members of this committee and the staff of this committee have heard many reports from NOAA that the reports in the Post were representative of what was going on generally. This is not simply a short-term problem. I hope it is a short-term problem, Mr. Chairman. I hope that this does not continue to occur, but this amendment would make sure that there are lasting protections that if any administration, this one or the next one, decides that they are going to have scientific research results flow from politics, that those scientists who blow the whistle on that will be protected. Mr. Chairman, I urge the adoption of this amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. I'm going to take some time to lay out my position on this amendment because it raises an important issue that is too often subject to demagoguery. I think it's fair to say that no one in this Congress has been more vocal than I have about the need for federal agencies, and the Congress for that matter, to encourage open scientific communication. I have strenuously objected when agencies or congressional committees have appeared to unfairly constrain or intimidate scientists. You know, policy should be informed by science rather than have science being influenced by policy. So I'm not denying that such situations occur. In the case of NOAA, the agency has frankly developed an unfortunate reputation as a place where scientists are not always able to communicate freely and fully with the general public on sensitive topics. That said, it's been a little difficult to pin down specific, clear-cut cases in which scientists have been muzzled. One gets more of a sense that scientists are sort of walking on eggshells when discussing issues like climate change. There seems to be a problem with the atmosphere at NOAA. At the same time, NOAA scientists have continued without constraint to conduct their research and participate in scientific conferences. And NOAA has had what is generally viewed as a model policy governing communications. Finally, Admiral Lautenbacher has issued very clear statements urging open communications, and no one has accused him of personally trying to shut down communications. So what we have is an agency that clearly has some problems, where scientists clearly sometimes feel constrained for whatever reasons, but where the problem seems to originate with discrete steps taken by mid-level and some more senior officials in particular instances, and worries that other steps might be taken in the future. This is a situation that cries out for a remedy, but it hardly cries out for legislation. In fact, the last thing needed to create a more settled atmosphere at NOAA is a legalistic regime that would send everyone to their lawyers each time there's a question or a misunderstanding about how exactly to communicate with the public or what to do when a scientist is talking about policy as opposed to pure science. What's needed instead, in my view, is more active engagement on the communication issue at the top level of NOAA. And Dr. Ehlers and I have sent, and you've referred to it, a very clear and strong letter to Admiral Lautenbacher outlining the steps we think need to be taken, and we'll make that letter public today. This follows up on a letter that I have sent to the Admiral as far back in April. These communication issues are subtle, and each one is a little different, and they need to be handled through oversight, not through legislation. I'd add that this strategy seems to be working at NASA. When NASA had a problem, Mr. Gordon and I worked very effectively and very closely and very cooperatively with NASA, mostly behind the scenes, to get the situation straightened out. That doesn't mean there will never again be an issue there. Oversight has to be done on a continuing basis, and we're committed to that proposition. But no one has argued that the situation at NASA hasn't vastly improved, to the credit of Administrator Griffin and Deputy Administrator Dale, who I might add got her training on this committee, as well as to all of us. So I don't think legislating in this area is a good idea in general. But let me outline my specific concerns about this particular amendment. First, this amendment would sidetrack this bill by sending it to the Government Reform Committee. Needless to say, this language is rather controversial in that committee, or they already would have acted on the bill on which this amendment is based, a bill that has been sitting in that committee for most of this Congress. I'd point out that this bill also still needs to go through the Resources Committee, and that's perhaps not the ideal venue to debate this subject. Second, for the reasons I've already described, I don't think this is a problem that is best solved by legislation. And third, the language of the amendment doesn't even address the issues that have been raised at NOAA. The amendment language is based on a bill that was drafted largely in response to allegations about science issues related to human health. No one at NOAA has been accused of tampering with scientific research or censoring findings, a vague term in any event, or disseminating information known to be false. Yet those are the formal offenses created by this amendment. So this amendment would have the perverse effect of forcing anyone with a complaint about communications at NOAA to try to describe, thank you, Counsel, to try to describe their problem in the terms used in this amendment. That would hardly help resolve these issues. The amendment also deals with advisory bodies, again, using language designed to apply to different panels than the ones NOAA has. The NOAA advisory bodies tend to be, in part, policy bodies, not purely scientific ones. We're not talking primarily about an advisory panel to determine, say, a safe level for lead in blood. And I won't even get into the peer review guidelines issues raised by the amendment, which is an entirely separate, complex issue that shouldn't be fought out on this bill for one agency. So I strongly oppose this amendment. It would kill this organic act while only making worse the problems at NOAA that its sponsor claims to want to resolve. It is based on a bill drafted by and for another committee that didn't have the NOAA situation in mind when it was drafting. I think we should swiftly and soundly defeat this amendment, pass the bill, and continue to monitor NOAA's communications policy as part of our oversight responsibilities. And let me add, we take those responsibilities seriously, both Mr. Gordon and I, on a bipartisan basis. I wish some other committees would follow the lead of this committee and do the same thing. With that, I urge strongly that this amendment be defeated. Now, is there anyone else who seeks to be recognized? Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Miller laid out the merits of this bill very well, so I won't proceed to elaborate there. What I would like to do is concur with the chairman in a couple of ways. First of all, I want to concur with the chairman in saying that we have had some difficulty with scientific integrity at NOAA. And secondly, I want to concur with the chairman in saying he has been a champion in trying to work through these problems. Unfortunately, he's going to be leaving us soon. And let me just say, I don't consider this a partisan bill. Although I may not see another Democrat in my lifetime, certainly Ralph Hall is likely to find one. And when that occurs, I think that you're going to want, both parties are going to want best information from these agencies without any kind of filtering. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of trying to allow Congress to do its job. And if we don't do it here, I don't know where we're going to get it done. Again, I concur with Mr. Miller's amendment. I think that it is a nonpartisan amendment. It is an amendment that each side of this rostrum is going to want at the appropriate time so that we can do our job. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much for the complimentary words. But I wish to point out that I've never used the word partisan in referring to this amendment. This committee works on a bipartisan basis. And my view is that we've got sort of two choices. We can do as some committees do, where the majority runs roughshod over the minority, not even taking into consideration the views of the minority. I am proud to say that that's not the model we follow on this committee. And when I look across to your side of the aisle, I look across not only to see people I work with and am friendly with on a personal basis, but people I work with and am cooperative with on a professional basis. This committee can hold its head high and say we're not part of the problem. You refer to the fact that I'm going to be leaving, and I am going to be leaving. That wasn't a draft invitation, was it? But there are many reasons why I am leaving, but one of the reasons that I announced in my statement on March 17 was that I came to this Hill 42 years ago as a starry-eyed young staffer. And for the past 24 years, it's been my privilege to serve as a member of this great institution. I have never seen a higher level of partisanship or a lower level of tolerance for another point of view. Fortunately, in this committee, that situation doesn't exist, nor will it as long as I'm privileged to be in this chair. Dr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to discuss in some detail why I think it would be inappropriate to adopt this amendment at this point. This Organic Act that we have before us has been in preparation for more than 6 years. We have spent a great deal of time on it in subcommittee. I have personally devoted a lot of time to it. We have had innumerable roadblocks, including the latest, which was a claim of jurisdiction by another committee, which took us several months to resolve. My time as chairman of this subcommittee is coming to an end. The time of getting this passed through both the House and the Senate is coming to an end. It's going to be touch and go the way it is. I would not want to see this bill sidetracked in any way and assigned to another committee other than the Resources Committee, which is going to add their part of it, the Organic Act, to this bill. So I urge that we reject this amendment. I would also like to point out the nature of an Organic Act and why we have worked so hard on this and we have touched base with so many different segments. An Organic Act is, in a sense, almost a constitution for a committee. There are very few organic acts out there. The best example is the National Science Foundation, which has had the same Organic Act for roughly 50 years. It has very seldom, if at all, been amended by the Congress. It is regarded as the guiding act, and any laws pertaining to the National Science Foundation have avoided amending the Organic Act. Similarly, we are trying to write that type of, quote, constitution, end quote, for for NOAA and all its activities. It is a very concise document, contains a great deal, but we have tried to deal with the issue that the amendment addresses in the Act in the following words: nothing in this Act shall be construed to limit the ability of an administration employee to discuss scientific research performed by that employee. That says it in one sentence, what the essence of the amendment is. Yet the amendment goes on for 11 pages. It's 1/3 the length of our entire bill. And I just think it's inappropriate to insert that detail in our Organic Act. And if the author of the amendment would wish to offer this as a bill which would apply to all the various scientific agencies, NIH, NASA, NSF, NOAA, and so on down the line, Department of Energy, that might be an appropriate move to go into that kind of detail for a general statement of all governmental science agencies. But as I say, it's inappropriate to put something of that length, that detail, in an Organic Act which applies to only one agency, and certainly not the largest scientific agency of the federal government. So I encourage the defeat of the amendment, and I believe we have taken care of it as fully as we need to or should in this Organic Act with that one sentence which I read. It's very complete, very thorough. Nothing in this act shall be construed to limit the ability of an administration employee to discuss scientific research performed by that employee. NOAA already has in place a policy. It is a good enough a policy that when NASA developed some problems on this, they referred to the NOAA policy and made their new policy based on the NOAA policy. It's not that there is a pressing need in this particular agency for this. And as I said, to repeat myself, if this is a serious problem that has to be addressed in this detail in an 11-page amendment, it should be done with a bill that applies to all science agencies and not just to one agency which has not demonstrated any major problems. So I urge the defeat of this amendment and urge that we pass the organic bill in the form as submitted to this committee.
Would my friend yield for just a moment?
Yes, I'll yield if
if I could address your specific question. For your information, there has been a bill introduced specifically dealing with scientific integrity across the board. It's the bill I introduced over a year ago. It has been referred in part to this committee, and there's been no hearings on it.
May I ask what other committees?
I yield back my time.
Just reclaiming my time, could the gentleman inform me what other committees it has been referred to? And I'll yield to him for that answer.
Government reform, as well as this committee. And Mr. Miller's amendment is based almost entirely on that bill, but being more specific to this committee, since this committee has not had hearings on the bill that you requested.
Gentleman's time is
reclaiming my time, I'd simply state that illustrates precisely the problem. We do not want the Organic Act to go to the Government Reform Committee. We would never see it again.
The very distinguished chairman has made the point I was about to make. That is part of the problem when you refer to other committees. Other committees don't follow our example. They don't lead and get things done. They sit on legislation for far too long. And the second thing I would observe is that Dr. Ehlers is a very distinguished scientist in his own right, a physicist, a PhD, a fellow of the American Physical Society. No one values unfettered scientific inquiry more than the scientific community that we're here to try to help. And Dr. Ehlers, I thank you for your input. Is there
Chairman,
anyone
since
else?
you raised a new issue, may I address that quickly?
Be glad to recognize Mr. Gordon.
Let me first concur. Dr. Ehlers is a great asset to this committee, and his integrity should not be challenged in any way. But in terms of joint jurisdiction, let me point out that already this year, this committee has had 26 bills where we have exchanged letters in lieu of referrals between the Science Committee and other committees, and I'm sure there's going to be additional letters of exchange. And as you just mentioned, you've already done that on this bill already once. So I feel sure this could be worked out if there was an effort, since this bill is specific to NOAA.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Gilchrist.
I thank the chair for recognizing me, and I would like to make reiterate the comment that the chairman and Mr. Ehlers have made. The NOAA Organic Act is highly recommended by the Pew Oceans Commission and led by Leon Panetta, and the National Ocean Commission led by Admiral Watkins. NOAA right now is contained in the Department of Commerce, and it is a poor second cousin of the Department of Commerce. As a result of this structure, the frame that NOAA exists under, the United States has no coherent ocean policy. It is not a separate independent agency like NASA. It doesn't have the same kind of clout in Congress that other independent agencies have. That's just the way it works. It's the human condition. I said, NOAA, the U.S. has no coherent ocean policy. We have no ocean policy. There is a myriad of committees that deal with these kinds of issues, and not just government reform or transportation or science or resources, but we're talking about commerce. We're talking about ways and means. We're talking about armed services. This goes across the board. It is vital at this point to keep the momentum going for good science, to take that Ocean Commission report so it doesn't gather dust like other reports do around here, and it's completely ignored, to set the stage for a NOAA Organic Act so they can be a separate independent agency and we can begin the process of developing clear ocean policy. The other issues that are brought out here today can be dealt with. They must be dealt with, but they can be dealt with more effectively outside this particular bill, and I unfortunately at this point urge a no vote on Mr. Gordon or Mr. Miller's amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilchrist. Mr. Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to commend the way that the chairman and ranking member Gordon have worked together very, very well on a range of issues, including this one. And I also want to recognize that Chairman Ehlers and I on this subcommittee have worked together on this bill. And I want to lay out the reasons why I think it's important to support Mr. Miller's amendment today. And Mr. Chairman, I think that you have been very forthright in your statements about the importance of scientific integrity and making those views known to folks at NASA and NOAA and other agencies. But if you go back to June of 2005, the Union of Concerned Scientists, in a survey of NOAA fishery scientists, found that half of all respondents were aware of instances of political interference with scientific opinions, and over half were aware of cases where Commerce appointees, quote, inappropriately altered NOAA fisheries determinations. Now, fast forward to April of this year, and Mr. Chairman, you sent a letter to Admiral Lautenbacher highlighting some of the issues, and I believe that one of the statements was our staff has heard concerns about politicization repeatedly, and the problem goes beyond just a few instances.
Will the gentleman yield?
Once I finish, I'd be happy to yield. But after you sent the letter, Mr. Chairman, Greenwire reported that NOAA directed all media inquiries on salmon to go through several political appointees. And the reason why I'm pointing out there's this problem with NOAA fisheries, it also applies to the National Weather Service on climate research, which is a part of NOAA. It was my personal experience to have met with NOAA folks on the Klamath salmon issue and their proposal to prohibit all sport and commercial fishing in the Pacific Ocean. And the prohibition on all ocean salmon fishing would have saved, at most, 500 salmon, whereas all the studies show that the upriver policies were killing 85,000 salmon, 85,000 spring Chinook salmon every year. And this is not a threatened run. This is not an endangered run. But NOAA was proposing to close down the entire fishery to protect this one run in one river, the Klamath River. And I struggled with the NOAA administrators back and forth, and it was like a debate to get them to admit that it was upriver policies that was causing this problem. And I asked them the direct question several times: wouldn't changing water management solve this problem much more effectively? And they repeatedly answered no. And finally, I got the form of the question right, and I said, well, if we change upriver water management and ecosystem recovery in the water basin, would that solve the problem? And the answer magically became yes. And without direct contact with NOAA scientists, I never would have been able to form that question and get that admission out of the folks at NOAA. I think it is very, very important. It's very, very important specifically in a policy instance and in direct dealings with the folks at NOAA. But I think Mr. Miller's amendment is also important for one other reason, and that is the Supreme Court case, which came out, I believe, after your letter, Mr. Chairman, Garcetti versus Ceballos, which dramatically cut back on the protection which whistleblowers have. In that particular case, Mr. Ceballos, a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles, found that a deputy sheriff had lied in order to get a search warrant and brought it to the attention of his superiors. He was ignored, and when, as required by bar rules, disclosed this to the defense, he was removed from the case, demoted, and transferred. And the Supreme Court ruled that he was not protected, and the law has changed just recently. This is just this May 30th, and it is appropriate to provide statutory protection when the traditional protections have been cut back. I understand the chairman's concern and Dr. Ehler's concern about about a referral to another committee, but I think that it is extremely important that we get this right, especially with the underlying change in the law because of the Supreme Court case. I'd like to yield to Mr. Gilchrist and Mr. Miller.
There's no more time because your time has expired. The red light is on, and Mr. Gilchrist graciously consented not to go further. Let me point out that both sides, I think, have fairly well capsulized and expanded on their respective positions. And so we'll go to a vote. Before we go to a vote, Dana, Mr. Rohrabacher asked for a minute.
I'll just go very quickly. I don't believe that what we're talking about here is politics within this committee, but I do believe it's based on political posturing that happened outside this committee. And this is, frankly, the charges that this administration has been stifling people on the issue of global warming, and it is just total nonsense, but based on some actions that were politically based actions by certain scientists, especially at NASA. Let me note that the very first action taken by the Clinton administration was to fire the head of the chief scientist at the Department of Energy because he was skeptical of global warming. I will put in the record at this point a number of references and articles by scientists who have noted that they have not been able to receive grants in recent years since the Clinton administration and into this administration because of their skepticism of global warming. And if there is any type of muzzling going on, it's the opposite of what's being presented here today, and this is turning, reality on its head. And that's why, even though I understand...
Will Mr. Rohrabacher yield?
You know what? I promised the chairman I'd be less than 2 minutes, and that's it. So I've had my say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Honda, do you have a brief intervention?
Mrs. Chairman, I'd like to move to strike the last word.
Yeah,
And I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Miller.
Right, but not for the full 5 minutes. Look, here's what the chair is trying to do. Recognize that a number of members of the committee have other committees competing with us, and some of those committees are actually voting and require their attendance, so we'd like to get on with it. But Mr. Miller, for a brief intervention.
Mr. Chairman, I will defer. I will not use this.
Thank you very much. And that's a spirit of cooperation. It's so evident. Both sides have laid out the case. So now the vote is on the Miller Amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The noes appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Bollert?
No.
Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall votes no. Mr. Smith? Mr. Weldon? Mr. Reichert? Mr. Reichert votes no. Mr. Rohrabacher? Mr. Rohrabacher votes no. Mr. Calvert? Mr. Calvert votes no. Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Ehlers? Mr. Ehlers votes no. Mr. Guteneck? Mr. Guteneck votes no. Mr. Lucas? Mr. Lucas votes no. Ms. Biggert? Ms. Biggert votes no. Mr. Gilchrist? Mr. Gilchrist votes no. Mr. Aiken? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Forbes? Mr. Forbes votes no. Mr. Bonner? Mr. Feeney? Mr. Feeney votes no. Mr. Nagelbauer? Mr. Nagelbauer votes no. Mr. Inglis? Mr. Inglis votes no. Mr. Sodrell? Mr. Sodrell votes no. Mr. Schwartz? Mr. Schwartz votes no. Mr. McCall? Mr. Diaz-Balart? Mr. Gordon? Mr. Costello? Mr. Gordon votes yes. Mr. Costello? Mr. Costello votes yes. Ms. Johnson? Ms. Woolsey? Ms. Hooley? Ms. Hooley votes yes. Mr. Udall? Mr. Udall votes yes. Mr. Wu? Mr. Wu votes yes. Mr. Honda?
Yes.
Mr. Honda votes yes. Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller votes yes. Mr. Davis? Mr. Davis votes yes. Mr. Lipinski? Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Sherman? Mr. Baird? Mr. Matheson? Mr. Costa? Mr. Costa votes yes. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes yes. Mr. Melanson? Mr. Melanson votes yes. Mr. Moore? Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes yes. Mr. Sherman, you are not recorded. Mr. Sherman votes yes.
Clerk, when the clerk is prepared, will report. I did. I read.
Yes, 13, no, 17.
The amendment is defeated. Next, Chair recognizes Ms. Matsui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that the NOAA Organic Act is once again moving forward today. The research and information that NOAA provides on our coastal resources, climate and weather is critical to policymaking, and particularly to my home state of California. This agency is certainly deserving of an explicit authorization, and I applaud Chairman Bollert, Dr. Ehlers, Ranking Member Gordon, and Representative Wu for their hard work on this legislation. I was glad to work with the committee on report language, which ensures that we're leveraging NOAA's scientific and technical expertise to support the competitiveness goals this committee advanced during last week's markup. NOAA's day-to-day operational missions to protect our coastal resources, manage our fisheries, and forecast the weather provide excellent illustrations of the real-world application of science. I want to make sure we continue to take advantage of that opportunity. Therefore, the language we have agreed to will ensure that NOAA continues to promote public understanding of these critical issues. The world is always changing. My granddaughter is 2.5 years old, and I know she has been born in a very different world than I was. I want her to be able to understand the changes going on around her and what they mean to her future and her children's future. This language directs NOAA to continue to provide the research and information that will allow Anna and all her friends to have such a comprehension of these important issues. I thank the chairman for his willingness to include this report language, and I look forward to working with him and other members of the committee to advance these goals in future legislation. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, I thank the gentlelady for the excellent point she's made regarding this bill, and I'm pleased she is already proving to be a very active member of this committee, and I appreciate how cooperative she and her staff have been in working this out, the report language, with the majority staff. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee. I don't see her here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, since Ms. Jackson Lee is not here, I have an amendment that I would like to offer at this time.
Which is not on the roster. Let's proceed with the amendment on the roster. We'll deal with that, then we'll get to you, Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Mr.
But
Chairman.
Mr. Gordon, would you like to offer the amendment on behalf of Ms. Jackson Lee?
Mr. Chairman, I will, and if with your indulgence, I would like to reserve her right to comment on it at some later time.
Without objection, so ordered.
We have an amendment at the desk, H.R. 5450, introduced by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5450 offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, that is so ordered. And now for brief explanation of an amendment that we find in good order and we are prepared to accept. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I don't want to mess up a good thing since you said you're going to accept this. Let me just congratulate Ms. Jackson Lee on bringing forth this amendment. We all know that the Weather Service has a vital role to play by communicating warnings and watches of several weather events within the federal government, as well as the state and local governments and the general public. And I think you do a very good job of this. This amendment will help them do that, and I thank you for accepting it. And if we would like to reserve her right to make a comment if we're still in when she arrives.
That's fine. The vote will be on the amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee. The vote is on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Costello.
Mr. Chairman, I offer an amendment and send the amendment to the clerk's desk.
Well, this is a late entry in the race, so let's have the distribution of the amendment so we can look at it.
It is indeed. Mr. Chairman, can I explain the amendment while it's being distributed?
I look forward to your eloquent words of explanation. Well, wait.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Clerk needs to designate. First of all, clerk, will you designate the amendment?
Amendment to H.R. 5450 offered by Mr. Costello of Illinois.
Would you read it, please, because we don't have it.
In Section 9, add at the end of the following new subsection. C, direct transmittal of reports. All reports the administration is required to transmit to the Congress shall be transmitted directly by the administration, comma, without prior review by the President or any other federal agency or official.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. And Mr. Chairman, this is a very simple amendment. It is very clear and right to the point, and I'm sure it's an amendment that the chairman can accept. Mr. Chairman, this provision requires NOAA to provide the committees of jurisdiction of the Congress with reports the agency has prepared at our direction, that those reports come directly to the committee without prior approval, comments, or review by other officers or agencies of the government. In other words, Mr. Chairman, when the committee requests information from NOAA, it should come directly from NOAA. We should not receive information that has been filtered edited, and manipulated by this administration or future administrations through interagency and OMB review processes. If we are to exercise our constitutional responsibility, craft legislation, authorize and appropriate funds for agency programs, and oversee the activities and expenditures of these agencies within our jurisdiction, we must have information. The executive branch does not have the right to bar Congress from obtaining information from agencies. While this problem is not unique to this administration, I must say the Bush administration has routinely used procedures of interagency and OMB review to bury, delay, or alter information requested by the Congress. We could cite several examples, but I'm attempting to be brief here. The report on offshoring of jobs produced by the Technology Administration is a perfect example. Somehow, a 250-page report produced by analysts at TA was transformed into a 13-page pamphlet devoid of any substantial information. This editing process was done with the participation of offices such as OMB and the National Economic Council. It took a resolution and an inquiry and numerous letters and conversations between members of this committee and the chairman, as well as the Department of Commerce, to obtain the report that we should have been given months ago. Mr. Chairman, the executive branch has the right to assert its policy preferences. However, they do not have the right to manipulate information coming to the Congress to eliminate or distort information that does not conform to their policies. That applies to this administration or future administrations. Mr. Chairman, the amendment is simple, it's clear, it's to the point, and that is when the Congress of the United States or committees of jurisdiction order an agency to produce a report, that report should come directly from the agency to the committee of jurisdiction. It should not be filtered through the OMB and other agencies of the Congress. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge members to support my amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costello. You're correct. The amendment proposed is simple, it's clear, it's to the point. It's also very late. And let me tell you the position of the chair. We have held up marking up this NOAA Organic Act for some time so that we could have the good interaction between majority and minority, the staffs could work together, and only when we thought we were in a position to go forward and everyone was satisfied that we'd heard each other out, did we go forward. The chair would probably oppose this late entry if it suggested that we make apple the national fruit. In other words, I would be very much in favor of making apple the national fruit. But I don't want this committee to deviate from what has been the norm, working things out before we come into this room. I don't like last-minute entries in the race. We don't have a chance to evaluate it. We don't have a chance to discuss it. That's not the way this committee or Congress should work. So with that explanation, the chair will oppose it. And let me point out that the one report you cite that was sort of delayed, the delay came from within, not because it was vetted across the administration lines or had to be sent down the Pennsylvania Avenue. It came from within. That was the delay. With that, is there any other who seek recognition on this amendment?
Did you? Mr. Chairman, let me say that this amendment is a late entry. It was not done intentionally to go around the process or not to give you notice, but it was, I decided to offer the amendment actually last evening when I was reviewing the legislation. There are other examples, not just with the TA report that came directly to this committee, but there are specific examples, and I know that you are interested in attempting to move the process along because members have other committees to go to, but I could cite reports with Health and Human Services and two other agencies where they have been filtered through OMB and other governmental agencies. I think it's pure and simple, and I don't understand why any member of this committee or the Congress would oppose. When the Congress orders a report from an agency, they ought to be able, that committee of jurisdiction, to get the report unfiltered without going through several other agencies. And I think the TA, I would disagree with my friend, the chairman of the committee, that the 250-page report that was edited down to 13 pages, it is one example, and I think we should have seen the 250-page report, and I don't think that OMB and other agencies of the government ought to be deleting or amending reports done by agencies ordered by this Congress.
Well, in that specific instance, Mr. Costello, let me point out that that was within the agency, the delay and the summation, as if you will, the condensation. It came from within, not from without. Secondly, I have the highest regard for the gentleman from Illinois, as you well know. But I beg to differ with your description about the lateness of it and the reason for it. Quite frankly, I am informed that our staff was told very specifically that there would be a late entry, and we should be prepared to deal with an amendment, not knowing what the amendment would be about, not knowing the specifics of the amendment. And we were told, quite honestly, that we could not have the specifics of the amendment. Now, maybe it was because there was difficulty in drafting what you explain as a simple, clear, and to the point amendment. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt in that. But the chair will vigorously oppose something like this simply because it deviates from standard accepted committee procedures where we work across the center aisle, where we invite input, where we sometimes listen instead of talking to the minority, because I find that when we listen instead of talking to the minority, we often learn from the minority. And I take great pride in the manner in which this committee operates, and therefore, because it is a deviation from the standard practice, and among other reasons, I will vigorously oppose it. Is there anyone else who seeks recognition on this? Dr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will oppose this for much the same reason I opposed the Miller Amendment. Once again, that's not an appropriate place to put it. Secondly, it should apply to all governmental agencies, not just to NOAA. And I would encourage the gentleman to consider offering this as a separate bill to the Government Reform Committee so that it would, in fact, apply to all government agencies. Frankly, I would like to see it take a different form as well as this. I think the administration should have the right to review, but I would insist that whatever review is given, whatever happens to it, the original report from the department or the agency should accompany the final report, which is submitted to us by the president. And I think that'd be a much better way to go, to allow the full administration of the country to state their point of view, as well as listening to the report from the specific governmental agency producing it. So I oppose this amendment for both reasons.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. Mr. Gordon.
Chairman, I ask to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to concur with you that I think best policy is to notice amendments as well as secondary amendments. However, that is not always happens in this committee on either side. That's what markups are for. This is not a complicated amendment. Honestly, I don't know all that's gone back and forth on this. You mentioned that our staff, which I didn't know about, put you on notice that something was coming up. I'm glad that that was done. But let me point out, this is a very simple amendment. Dr. Ehlers pointed out that this should be introduced in government reform and brought up as a Congress-wide. But let me point out once again, just like in Mr. Miller, that was done. I introduced that bill. It was sent to government reform, and it was referred to this committee, and this committee has refused to have hearings on it. So, I mean, it doesn't help to follow the rules if you're not going to follow through on it. So I don't think that holds water. Let me also point out that CRS has given us a legal opinion, something that ought to be common knowledge to all of us, and that is that if Congress requests an agency to do a study, that Congress has a right to have that. Now, all Mr. Costello is doing is saying, you know, as CRS said, is our right for that not to be filtered. Once again, this is not a partisan issue. This is, you know, I think Congress, whichever party, regardless of who's in charge, wants to get good information. And let me give you some examples why you want that information. We had this problem as we were trying to investigate the Columbia loss with OMB and NASA refusing to provide information, saying it was budgetary. The same thing happened with NOAA. And something that I guess we should all remember, if you remember back when we were talking about the Medicare prescription drug bill, OMB refused to give us the information on what it's going to cost. I think that if we had had that information, many of us might have voted a different way. We certainly would have had a better bill. Again, this is not a partisan issue. This is a matter of trying to let Congress have full information to do its job, and when that occurs, we're all better off. And I yield back the and I ask that the CRS opinion be made a part of the record, and I yield back my time.
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, we can vote.
Anybody else? All right. Without the vote is on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. Nay. The nays appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I ask for a recorded vote.
Mr. Costello requests a recorded vote. Therefore, would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Bullard.
No.
Mr. Bullard votes no. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall votes no. Mr. Smith. Mr. Weldon. Mr. Rohrabacher. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Bartlett votes no. Mr. Ehlers. Mr. Ehlers votes no. Mr. Gutnick. Mr. Gutnick votes no. Mr. Lucas. Mr. Lucas votes no. Ms. Biggert. Ms. Biggert votes no.
Clerk, explain. Mr. Rohrabacher, how is he recorded?
Mr. Rohrabacher is not recorded.
Mr. Calvert, how is he recorded?
Mr. Rohrabacher votes no. Mr. Calvert is not recorded.
Calvert?
Mr. Calvert votes no.
How is Mr. recorded?
Mr. Smith is not recorded. Mr. Smith votes no.
Continue the roll.
Mr. Gilchrist. Mr. Gilchrist votes no. Mr. Aiken. Mr. Aiken votes no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Forbes. Mr. Forbes votes no. Mr. Bonner. Mr. Feeney. Mr. Feeney votes no. Mr. Nagelbauer. Mr. Inglis. Mr. Inglis votes no. Mr. Reichert. Mr. Sodrell. Mr. Sodrell votes no. Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz votes no. Mr. McCall. Mr. Diaz-Balart.
How is Mr. Johnson recorded?
Mr. Johnson is not recorded.
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Johnson votes no.
How is Mr. Nagelbauer recorded?
Mr. Nagelbauer is not recorded. Mr. Nagelbauer votes no. We got him. Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon votes yes. Mr. Costello. Mr. Costello votes yes. Ms. Johnson. Ms. Woolsey. Ms. Hooley. Ms. Hooley votes yes. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall votes yes. Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu votes yes. Mr. Honda. Mr. Honda votes yes. Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller votes yes. Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis votes yes. Mr. Lipinski. Mr. Lipinski votes yes. Ms. Jackson Lee.
Aye.
Jackson Lee votes yes. Mr. Sherman. Mr. Baird. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson votes yes. Mr. Costa? Mr. Costa votes yes. Mr. Green? Mr. Green votes yes. Mr. Melanson? Mr. Melanson votes yes. Mr. Moore? Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Yes, 15, no, 19.
The amendment is defeated, and there are no other amendments on the roster, but we're graced by the presence of Ms. Jackson Lee. Let me report to you that in your absence, and I know you had a competing committee assignment, Mr. Gordon eloquently explained your amendment. He was so convincing that the chair adopted it and we passed it, but I will recognize you for a couple of minutes for any comment you might care to make to further enlighten us.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. My first word is to thank both the ranking member for offering it and protecting my amendment, and the chairman, and to acknowledge you're absolutely right. I did come to the Science Committee hearing markup, and of course, the time conflicted with a vote in another committee, and so I want my colleagues to know that I have great affection and respect for this committee and the offering of amendments. I would also like to welcome my colleague, Ms. Matsui, and thank her for a vote on my amendment. I will briefly say this, Mr. Chairman. There are those of us who are seasoned hurricane participants. If you spoke to the regions in the Gulf Coast 2 years ago, Florida and Alabama, Louisiana and Texas, and other places, we would say we know about hurricanes and we are able to weather the storm. But Hurricane Katrina woke us up, and my amendment simply allows the local first responders to have direct information from NOAA. And I believe that the amendment with the science that NOAA has the opportunity and the ability to possess and evidence gives a much more secure and much more a much greater opportunity, if you will, for the Gulf region to be more prepared than we've ever been. Katrina, Wilma, and Rita gave us a wake-up call in their collective power, and I believe that this amendment will help us to be more secure and more knowledgeable regarding the pending storms that we are to face in the coming season. So with that, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for protecting the amendment, and to my colleagues, thank you for supporting the Jackson Lee Amendment. And if I had been present, I would have voted aye for the Miller Amendment. With that, I don't have to call for a vote. A vote doesn't have to be called for, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other amendments? Hearing none, the vote is on the bill. H.R. 5450, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Act, as amended. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. And the bill is passed. I recognize Mr. Gordon for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee favor report H.R. 5450 as amended, although I would prefer that it had been further amended, to the House with recommendation that the bill as amended do pass. Furthermore, I move that the staff be instructed to prepare the legislative report and make necessary technical and conforming changes, and that the chairman take all necessary steps to bring the bill before the House for consideration.
The question is on the motion to report the bill as amended favorably. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I move that members have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. I move pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22 of the Rules of the House of Representatives that the committee authorizes the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to adopt and pass H.R. 5450, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Act, as amended. Without objection, so ordered. I want to thank the members for their participation. This hearing is adjourned.
Amen.